If there was a treasure recovered by Samuel Ball, maybe it still survives him, and it's somewhere around that foundation.
A forgotten clue, buried in centuries-old records, may rewrite the story of Oak Island. What began as a closer look at a mysterious symbol etched onto a 260-year-old map soon led researchers far beyond the island's shores to ancient religious relics, medieval strongholds, and a network of connections stretching across Europe. But the symbol was only one piece of a much larger puzzle. As new carbon dating results, celestial alignments, and unexpected archaeological discoveries continued to point toward the same period in history, a startling possibility emerged. What if that small marking on an old map wasn't merely decorative? What if it was a deliberate signpost left behind to guide someone toward a secret that has remained hidden for centuries? And what if the real mystery of Oak Island has never been the treasure itself, but the people who may have hidden it? Before we uncover the evidence, make sure to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications, because this investigation takes us deep into one of the most fascinating and controversial theories ever connected to Oak Island: the mystery hidden within. The Morris Map. For years, Scott Clark, a 32nd-degree Mason and author of Oak Island Odyssey, has investigated possible Masonic links to Oak Island. During Season 13, he arrived in the War Room with a presentation called From Nazareth to Nova Scotia, unveiling a theory unlike any the team had encountered before. His research centered on a seemingly ordinary document, Charles Morris's 1762 map of Mahone Bay. At first glance, the map appeared to be nothing more than a standard colonial survey of Nova Scotia's coastline. Morris worked as a government surveyor under British authority, and his maps were designed for practical purposes. They identified harbors, property lines, and navigational features, not hidden clues to lost treasures. Yet, while studying the map, Clark spotted a curious detail. One stylized letter A featured an unusual V-shaped crossbar. Most people would likely dismiss it as a decorative flourish, a surveyor's notation, or a simple cartographic symbol. Clark saw something different. When he extended the directional angle suggested by the symbol, the line pointed directly toward Oak Island. On its own, that observation could easily have been written off as an interesting coincidence. After all, researchers have spent decades examining old maps in search of hidden meanings. But Clark was convinced there was more to the story. His investigation soon led him thousands of miles away, to Rome. There, he focused on the Titulus Crucis, an ancient wooden tablet housed in the Basilica of the Holy Cross. Tradition holds that this relic once hung above Jesus during the crucifixion. What captured Clark's attention was the inscription itself. Among the lettering appeared the same unusual A-shaped character with its distinctive V-shaped crossbar, the very symbol that had stood out on the Morris map. The trail didn't stop there. Clark next turned his attention to Portugal and the famous Convent of Christ in Tomar. Far from being an ordinary monastery, the site served as the headquarters of the Order of Christ, the successor organization that inherited the wealth, influence, and maritime ambitions of the Portuguese Templars after the original Knights Templar were dissolved in the early 14th century. While Templars across much of Europe faced persecution and arrest, those in Portugal survived by reorganizing under a new identity. Over time, the Order of Christ became one of the driving forces behind Portugal's great age of exploration, sending ships across the oceans beneath the iconic Templar cross. At Tomar, researcher Corjan Mol documented carvings displaying the same distinctive A-shaped design. Clark also identified similar symbols carved into Portuguese Templar gravestones, suggesting that the pattern had appeared repeatedly across different locations and centuries. These discoveries led him to a remarkable conclusion. According to Clark, a fragment of the True Cross may have been transported across the Atlantic by members of the Order of Christ and ultimately concealed on Oak Island. It's a theory as fascinating as it is controversial. The challenge, however, is that the evidence relies heavily on visual comparisons. Similar symbols appearing in different places do not automatically prove a direct connection. Even if the designs look alike, that alone cannot establish who created them, or whether they were ever intended to share the same meaning. Yet despite those concerns, the War Room did not dismiss Clark's proposal, and that wasn't simply because of the presentation itself. It was because several other discoveries made during Season 13 seemed to be pointing toward the very same period in history. The clues, written in the stars. Clarke's symbol theory emerged at a time when another line of investigation was gaining momentum, one based not on maps or relics, but on the night sky. Professor Adriano Gaspani began examining Oak Island through the lens of archaeoastronomy, a field that studies how ancient structures align with celestial objects. His approach relied on a phenomenon known as axial precession. Over thousands of years, Earth's rotational axis slowly shifts, causing the apparent positions of stars to change. By measuring how certain structures align with specific stars, researchers can estimate when those structures may have been built. One of Gaspani's primary focuses was the strange octagonal stakes discovered in the swamp. These 8-sided wooden markers were arranged in paired formations unlike any known British colonial surveying system found in Nova Scotia or elsewhere in the colonial world. According to his analysis, the alignment of these stakes corresponds with the setting position of Deneb, the brightest star in the constellation Cygnus. Even more intriguing, that same celestial alignment appears to connect with Nolan's Cross, the massive stone formation first identified and mapped decades ago by Fred Nolan with remarkable surveying precision. Using precession-based calculations, Gaspani examined Nolan's Cross, the stone triangle, the stone cairn on Lot 15, and several other features across the island, searching for evidence that they may all share a common historical origin. The dates Gaspani calculated for Nolan's Cross, the swamp stakes, and several other island features all pointed to a surprisingly narrow window of time, between 1200 and 1300 AD. That conclusion immediately raised eyebrows. These dates don't fit within the accepted colonial history of Nova Scotia. They don't belong to the era of European settlement after contact with the New World. Instead, they point to the medieval period, hundreds of years earlier than historians would normally expect. If accurate, these structures would predate the earliest known European settlements in the region by nearly 3 centuries. But Gaspani didn't stop with dating alone. He decided to test whether the same astronomical patterns could be found at locations with known historical connections to the Knights Templar. His attention turned to Anzano Castle in northern Italy. Unlike many sites associated with Templar legends, Anzano Castle is not based on speculation. Historical records firmly identify it as a genuine Templar property. When Gaspani analyzed its celestial alignments, he uncovered something remarkable. The site shared the same stellar references found on Oak Island. Both locations aligned with Cygnus and Arcturus, the same stars, the same angular relationships. Think about what that means. One location is a verified Templar stronghold in Europe, supported by centuries of documentation. The other is a mysterious stone formation on an island in Nova Scotia, where no medieval European builders were ever expected to be. Yet both appear connected to the same celestial markers and the same historical period. The pattern grew even larger when researcher Charlotte Wheatley expanded the investigation beyond Italy. She identified 3 medieval churches near Talmont-sur-Gironde in southwestern France that seemed to fall along a line extending toward Oak Island. When Gaspani examined those churches, he found another surprising connection. Their astronomical alignments matched those associated with Oak Island's Lot 5 circular feature. The shared stellar references included Sirius, the Pleiades, and Hamal. His calculations dated the Lot 5 structure to approximately 1236 AD. Once again, locations separated by thousands of miles appeared to be speaking the same astronomical language. Medieval churches in France and a stone feature on a remote North Atlantic island both pointed toward the same century and relied on the same celestial framework. Of course, none of this proves that the Knights Templar built Nolan's Cross or any other Oak Island structure. That distinction matters. Astronomical alignments can reveal that a builder possessed certain knowledge of the stars. They can help estimate when a structure was likely created, but they cannot identify the specific people responsible. Many medieval groups understood astronomy. The stars can suggest a time frame. They cannot provide names. Still, the evidence kept leading back to the same period, the 1200s and 1300s. And many of the construction techniques appeared strikingly similar to those documented at confirmed Templar locations in Europe. That doesn't amount to proof, but it certainly creates a pattern that deserves serious attention. What the ground continued to reveal, while the stars were offering one set of clues, the physical evidence buried beneath Oak Island was telling a remarkably similar story. Carbon-14 analysis of leather shoe fragments recovered from the swamp produced a primary date range between 1148 and 1216 AD. Pause for a moment and consider the implications. Those dates place the leather squarely within the era of the Crusades and the earliest centuries of the Templar Order itself. There is currently no widely accepted historical explanation for European-style crafted leather appearing on Oak Island during that period. The Norse settlements had disappeared centuries earlier. The Mi'kmaq did not manufacture footwear in this style, and permanent French settlements in Nova Scotia would not be established for another 400 years. Then investigators made another discovery beneath the massive boulder on Lot 8. Hidden underneath was a carefully constructed stone cradle assembled using 3 different types of mortar. That detail is especially important. Multiple mortar types often indicate either construction carried out over a long period of time or work, completed by builders drawing materials from different sources. Dating analysis placed the structure sometime after the 1200s but before the 1700s. Nearby, soil samples revealed lead concentrations 11 times higher than normal background levels for the island. Mixed within the surrounding layers were ash and coal deposits consistent with metalworking or smelting activities. Whoever was present on Oak Island during the medieval era appears to have been doing far more than simply passing through. They were building, they were working with stone, and they may have been processing metal as well. Then came another intriguing find. Researchers recovered stone cannonballs crafted from olivine gabbro and olivine basalt, volcanic rock types that do not naturally occur anywhere in Nova Scotia. Geologist Dr. Robert Rayside traced the material to the Azores, the Portuguese volcanic islands located deep in the Atlantic. Further analysis by archaeologist Dr. Lori Niemi linked this style of stone shot to the 14th and 15th centuries. Meanwhile, experts at a Portuguese military museum confirmed that the dimensions matched cannon ammunition used aboard ships from that era. Additional CT scans conducted by Emma Culligan revealed pecking marks across the surfaces of the stones, clear evidence of intentional shaping using medieval stoneworking techniques. Perhaps most significant of all was where these discoveries came from. They were not recovered from a single excavation. They emerged from different locations across the island, and they were examined by different specialists using completely different scientific methods. Carbon dating was used on the leather fragments. Mortar analysis was performed on the stone structure. Geological sourcing traced the cannonballs. Archaeoastronomy examined the alignments of stones and wooden stakes. 4 separate disciplines, 4 independent investigations. Yet all of them pointed toward roughly the same period in history, the 12th through the 15th centuries, the very era suggested by Clarke's symbol theory. One unusual discovery might be dismissed as coincidence. 2 begin to attract attention. But when multiple independent lines of evidence repeatedly converge on the same centuries, it becomes much harder to ignore. Together, they suggest that something important may have happened on Oak Island during the medieval period. The question is no longer whether the evidence is unusual. The real mystery is understanding exactly what happened there. Why this symbol matters. Oak Island has never been short on mysterious symbols. Nolan's Cross spans hundreds of feet across Oak Island, its massive granite boulders positioned with a level of precision that continues to fascinate researchers. Nearby, the stone triangle overlooking South Shore Cove has been examined, measured, and debated for decades. Across the island, various carvings etched into rocks have inspired countless interpretations. Some believe they are Templar symbols. Others see Mi'kmaq, petroglyphs, colonial survey markings, or something else entirely. The problem is that nearly every symbol discovered on Oak Island has eventually faced the same challenge. Sooner or later, an alternative explanation emerges. What first appears to be a deliberate marker can later be interpreted as a natural rock formation, an ordinary surveyor's reference, or simply an example of people finding patterns where none were intended. Oak Island's history is full of discoveries that once seemed revolutionary, but later proved far less certain. That's what makes Clarke's symbol different, not because of the symbol itself, but because of everything surrounding it. Viewed on its own, the unusual letter found on the 1762 Morris map could easily be dismissed as a decorative cartographic feature. Likewise, the similarity between that symbol and the inscription found on an ancient Roman relic could be nothing more than chance. Human beings are exceptionally good at spotting patterns. In fact, we're often so good at it that we create connections that don't actually exist. We see shapes in clouds, faces in shadows, and meaningful arrangements among random points of light in the night sky. For that reason, the comparison involving the Titulus Crucis remains the most vulnerable part of Clarke's theory. Moving from "these symbols resemble each other" to "a fragment of the true cross was hidden on Oak Island" is a huge leap. Similar appearances alone simply cannot support a conclusion that dramatic. Yet focusing only on the symbol misses the bigger picture. Clarke's presentation did not emerge in a vacuum. It arrived during a season when multiple discoveries were already pushing investigators toward the same historical period. Leather fragments recovered from the swamp had been dated to the 12th century. Astronomical studies suggested that key stone formations shared alignments with a documented Templar site in Italy. Volcanic stone cannonballs linked to the Azores had appeared among recovered materials, and construction beneath the Lot 8 boulder had been dated to the medieval era through mortar analysis. By the time Clarke presented his theory, several independent lines of evidence were already pointing in a similar direction. He may have drawn a line across a map, but carbon dating had already drawn one through time. The stars had traced another across the Atlantic, and the imported stone projectiles had already established a possible connection to Portugal. That is where the symbol gains its real significance. Its value is not that it proves the true cross theory. It doesn't. Instead, it contributes another independent thread to a much larger tapestry of evidence. For the first time, cartographic clues appeared to connect Oak Island with the same Portuguese Templar world that had already been suggested by archaeological finds, astronomical alignments, and scientific analysis. Clarke's discovery was not important because it solved the mystery. It was important because it seemed to fit a pattern that was already emerging from completely different sources. Throughout Season 13, clues from beneath the ground and clues written in the stars were repeatedly pointing toward the same medieval time frame. Clarke's contribution was giving that story a visible starting point, one preserved on a map drawn more than 260 years ago. Of course, none of this amounts to definitive proof that the Templars ever reached Oak Island. That's an important distinction. A collection of supporting clues is not the same thing as a proven historical fact. Anyone familiar with Oak Island knows how easily separate discoveries can be woven together into a convincing but ultimately incorrect narrative. Still, there comes a point where repeated coincidences become difficult to ignore. When multiple investigations conducted by different experts using different methods in different fields all continue arriving at the same centuries and the same cultural influences, the coincidence explanation begins to face its own challenges. At some stage, believing that every one of these findings is unrelated requires a significant leap of faith as well. The symbol on the Morris map appeared to connect Oak Island with Rome, Tomar, and a broader medieval network that Season 13 had been gradually assembling piece by piece. It did not prove the Templar hypothesis, but it provided a new avenue of inquiry that happened to align remarkably well with conclusions already suggested by archaeology, astronomy, and physical artifacts. Some links in Clarke's chain of reasoning may be stronger than others, yet the medieval timeline at the heart of the theory remains surprisingly consistent, and that consistency becomes even more compelling when we examine what investigators uncovered beneath the Lot 8 boulder, an artifact that may represent the strongest piece of physical evidence ever recovered on Oak Island. But that is a story for another time.